Welcome to the For Everyday Leaders podcast. Brandon Faust, Alex Holt here with you today. Alex, why don't you tell our listeners what the show is all about?
Yep, this podcast is all about helping people lead in the everyday spaces and moments of life. And today we have a really exciting guest with us. We have Karl Worley on the show. Karl is the Biscuit King.
The Biscuit
King from Biscuit Love. Karl and his wife, Sarah, started this amazing and booming biscuit business about 10 years ago in the greater Nashville, Tennessee area. The restaurant was awarded Andrew Zimmern's Munchies People's Food Choice Award and named Best Sandwich of 2015
in the nation
by Bon Appétit for its famed East Nasty, a buttermilk biscuit topped with fried chicken, aged cheddar, and sausage gravy.
Sounds so good.
I need one right now. In 2016, Food Network star Alton Brown noted that Biscuit Love's shrimp and grits were the best he had ever eaten. They have 3 locations currently, and they've got 2 more on the way. Karl and Sarah believe that being invited to their table is about more than just biscuits. It's about community, sharing, and connection. And they love that they've been able to spread the love while working together to build a family business. They invest deeply into their employees and their community.
And before we get to our conversation with Karl, this episode of the For Everyday Leaders podcast is sponsored by the Liston Lodge. The Liston Lodge is an event venue located in Hendricks County, just 35 minutes from downtown Indianapolis. The estate was a former 22,000 square foot gorgeous private residence, but now it's a unique venue that features elaborate woodwork, unique chandeliers, a cozy and homey atmosphere, and beautiful secluded grounds. Whether for a special event, corporate event, or a wedding, visit listonlodge.com. That's listonlodge.com. Now let's jump into our conversation with Karl Worley. Karl Worley, thank you so much. The Biscuit King, joining us from the Nashville, Tennessee area. Welcome and thanks for joining us on the show today. We met and connected through a mutual friend, Carrie Laddiser. Carrie was actually on the show, episode 13, and I think shortly after I had done that interview, you guys actually met with a group of people at an event in the Chicago area, and so after that, you and I got connected because Carrie was like, you need to meet my buddy Karl. You guys seem to value a lot of the same things. I think you guys would have a great conversation. And then I thought we were just going to have a 15-minute conversation that turned into an hour-ish conversation. And I'm like, did we just become best friends? Like stepbrothers, right? Like, did we just become best friends? Yeah. And I just really was resonating with so much of what you were talking about of like seeing others as made in the image of God, treating them with worth and dignity that's already bestowed upon them, and how you're doing that with your employees, with your team members. And then also just like, I think we've had some mutual kind of experiences of our relationship with Jesus, our relationship with, maybe sometimes struggle with our relationship with the local church in America. And what does it mean just to do what Jesus says, do it well, do it in life, do it in business, do it in family, do it in our communities. And so I'm just so pumped for people to hear your story. I'm sure some people have experienced the tasty goodness. I was talking to some friends and they're like, oh, that place is amazing. The line's always out the door. And I'm like, yes, we get to talk to our buddy Karl. And I know you and Sarah are doing amazing things. So Karl, welcome, man.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's exciting to be here. When Carrie was like, I need you to meet someone, I was like, sure. Anybody you say, let's do it.
And look at us now. Here we are. You've texted me and emailed me kind things as I was working on like garbage disposals, and I had my grill blow up in my face. So like, you've got to show me your ways, man. I'm obviously
your eyebrows are growing back great.
Yeah,
by the way.
You look really good.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I do appreciate that. So, Karl, tell us about before this whole, Biscuit Love journey and multiple restaurants and the ways in which you're making a great impact. Tell us kind of about little Karl growing up, life for you growing up. Where did that happen? What was it like? And then kind of how did you end up sort of on this path that you're on now, running restaurants and all this stuff with food? Tell us about it, man.
I grew up in East Tennessee, a little town called Bristol, and turned 18, grew up in a household that was full of verbal, physical abuse, knew that I didn't fit in that town and where I was at in my life at that point. And so I often joke I joined the Army, and they kicked me out because I had asthma. So I went and joined the railroad, and they moved me around quite a bit. Ended up in Nashville. Still didn't know what I wanted to do in life, and just kind of puttered around until I met my wife.
Wow. I mean, isn't that often the case though, where like there's this inflection point in a relationship with a significant other, and you're like, okay, now this life kind of makes a little bit more sense. So talk about what then you meet Sarah at that time. Then what are kind of those next steps to say, here's what I love, here's what I'm doing. How'd you just get into that, man?
Oh, it was a beautiful love story of, we started dating and she said, this can't get serious because I'm going to culinary school. And I said, that's the dumbest excuse I've ever heard. And she said, no, in Denver, Colorado. And I said, I always really had wanted to go to culinary school, but never had the guts to do it. And I said, well, what if I go to culinary school? And she said, well, I can't promise you anything, but I can't stop you from going to school. And 2 months later, I've sold everything I own. I'm driving across Kansas with her and her yippy dog going, I'm either going to marry this woman, or I'm going to write the best country song that's ever been written.
Oh my gosh. Now, did you have you talked about culinary school, but like, was that something that you grew up with, were passionate about, or were you just like, you know what, that sounds cool?
I grew up, my mom my parents divorced when I was 3. My mom worked in a lot of like little local delis and things. And I was the kid in the corner because when she couldn't find somebody to watch me, I would sit over there. So I grew up, she always cooked, never watched, never did anything. When I went to work for the railroad and moved to Atlanta, I was living in this loft apartment that was an old cotton mill, and it was kind of like college dormitory. And I started figuring out that chicks dig guys that could cook.
Yes,
and so every time I went back home, I'm like, okay, Mom, how do you make spaghetti? How do you do this? And the more I did it, the more I loved it, and the more that I could just do it for hours and time would pass. And
that's awesome. That's incredible.
Yeah, it's fun.
So talk about that journey. Then you guys get to culinary school. Obviously, it sounds like the relationship worked, like you were able to cook the perfect dish and win her heart. But talk about that journey through culinary school. What was that like? How did that kind of transform you and then lead you guys into starting this incredible restaurant?
We got married in between year 1 and year 2. She had always been told she'd never get pregnant. And so we're at this point, we're adults. I'm 30, she's 28. And we're like, okay, if we're going to pursue having kids, in vitro fertilization, blah, 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 you need to try for 2 years. So we're old. Let's go ahead and start this. So 2 weeks later, she happened to be in wine class, where you get to taste wine all day. It's a horrible class. And she came home, she said, I'm really sure I'm pregnant. And I'm like, what do you mean you can't get pregnant? She said, I cannot stand the smell of wine. And I'm like, I think you're just getting sick. And so she picked me up at the end of my class with a positive test result. And I was like, okay, here we go. And so we figured out, because part of that was you had to go to work for 3 months and do an internship. And so we lived in her dad's basement while she was 7, 8, 9 months pregnant, had talked the school into letting us combine a couple of semesters into one. She had our daughter. And then about a month later, she said, listen, I want to move back home to Mom, which is Nashville. And I said, wait, we've both spent $60,000 a piece on culinary school, and you want to move me back to the place that votes Carrabba's best Italian food every year? And she was like, yes. And she said, after heated debate, she said, Gert and I are moving, and I hope you'll join me. Not really like that. In my mind, that's what I blew it up to be in my guy's mind. And like any good marital dispute, I listened, and here I am. And so moved to Nashville, got a job with a company that sells food to restaurants. It was kind of death by 1,000 paper cuts. It was everything I don't believe in, mass farms, just going around trying to sell things to people, which I'm not great at. And So we started dreaming about what are we going to do? How are we going to get out of this? And we came up with the idea of a food truck. And this was long before Nashville Hot Chicken, anyone had even heard of them. I said, I want to do hot chicken on a food truck. And she said, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. You'll never work. And so I often tell her how much of a visionary I am. I like to get her to go, listen, tell me how good of a visionary I am. But she said, let's do biscuits. I love your biscuits. And I think that'd be a good vehicle for things. And so we started. And luck would have it, somebody that she went to college with was working for Jason McConnell, a guy that owns a few restaurants in downtown Franklin, Tennessee, and went to meet with him. He gave me a little time through her. And at the end of the meeting, he said, the best way to write a business plan is to do it and then write your business plan based on the findings. And I'm sitting here in my mind going, great, I've wasted 2 hours with this joker that's told me to go borrow money from my family. Cause our plan was, we're going to borrow 10 grand from our family. And so he's like, okay, go borrow the 10 grand and tell him you'll get back to him on what you're going to do with it. And I'm sitting here going, man, I've just wasted 2 hours of my life. I'm never going to get back. And he said, no, you don't understand what I'm saying, man. I've got a food truck that just sits there 350 days a year. Use it. And you're going to need a commissary. Use that. And my chef over there will help you. You just help him and let me have your driver's license. I'm gonna put you on the insurance. And I am not a man of detail. And so I said, okay, how much is this going to cost? Man, we'll worry about that later. And I was like, okay. I left. Sarah's like, where have you been? You're only supposed to be gone 30 minutes. I'm like, man, we got a food truck. She's like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, God, Jason's letting us use this food truck. Well, how much is this going to cost, Karl? I'm like, I don't know. She's like, Karl, we don't have any money. You need to go find out. And I'm like, he said we'd worry about it later. And so
just let me be a visionary. Just let me be
overarching, like how we jumped into this pool.
That is incredible.
What I love about it too, and I think the more conversations we have with this, regardless of like industry or education or anything, is that there's usually, I think we all think that people who have like an ounce of success, right, or whatever, that they just took this one or two pathways, right? Yeah. They were either right out of high school, this like brainiac, and they had all these ideas and they just started them and were successful. And usually that's not the case. Or they went to a 4-year, college experience and then went right into their field and they've stayed in that and they've built it. And usually it's like, nope. So did this thing in the arm, that didn't work. Did the railroad thing, found a way at 28, 30 to go to school in Colorado and then move back to a place I didn't really want to move back to, but my wife wanted. Like, I think it's such a beautiful, beautiful mosaic telling these stories because it's showing us that, okay, it doesn't matter if you're 25, 28, 33, 47, there might be something you have in your heart and you share that with somebody else. You dream about it. And then someone's like, hey, need a food truck? You need some space. You need a connection to a relationship. Do you need, have you ever heard of this or have you heard of this resource or whatever? And I love that as part of your story, Karl. I think it's such a great reminder, when, people.
It is. I know those people that have the straight line out of college. My brother-in-law, he knew at 13 he was going to marry his wife. They are married. They have 2.5 kids. Everything has worked out exactly like the graph that he drew at 13.
Yeah.
I used to envy those people. I am glad God let me wander in the wilderness for a lot of years because I feel like I know a lot more about myself and a lot more about who I am.
Yeah.
Yeah. So tell us then, okay, you get this food truck. What happened next, man? Like, because I think people now know, spoiler alert, like Biscuit Love's a thing and there's restaurants and you and Sarah are doing it, but like, and it's real, but what were those gritty times kind of like as you were figuring that stuff out?
We start out, going through the first summer. It was great. We get to fall. We're starting to like really dial this in. We get an actual employee that we're paying, loving life. And then November happens and the first cold snap, it was like somebody turned the faucet off.
Wow.
And we're like, okay, now what do we do? We just bought a Airstream off of a farm in about 20 miles outside of Nashville. The best thing somebody said about it was it looked like a mobile meth lab. It had fur on it. It had raccoons inside of it. It was crazy. And so here we are broke going, okay, what are we going to do?
Now at this time, are you guys like just side hustling this thing, or are you full hustling this thing? Are you guys working other jobs, or is this like you're all in on this thing? What's going on there?
God had the wherewithal to get me fired from my food job before I started the food truck. Because day one, I would have probably said, this is crazy. Thanks for letting me borrow this food truck. Here's your keys back.
Yeah.
I had no life raft. So I am hustling. Sarah's finishing up at this point, she's finishing up her bachelor's degree, going into her master's program.
Okay.
She's first semester in her master's program at that point. And I'll never forget, I grew up the way I grew up. Conflict to me meant broken relationships. Yeah. She grew up a daughter of a therapist. And so she has the wherewithal to call. She calls our landlord and says, listen, I don't know what happened, but we're probably not going to pay rent this month. And the lady goes, that's okay, baby. We know y'all are starting a business. Y'all get called up next month. She goes, yeah, that's the thing. Next month. Been looking a whole lot better. And she said, baby, y'all get called up. Don't worry about it. And so we go into wintertime. The guy that lets me borrow the food truck lets me pick up shifts at his restaurant. Wow. Helping him. We're hustling, trying to figure it out. Come out year two. We're like, okay, we're going to change it this year. We're going to be like little squirrels. We're going to take all of our nuts, put them up. And this winter we'll have a better winter. We get to fall again on our second year. And we're just caught back up. We have this food truck that we've jerked around and gotten mostly completed through friends, the kindness of strangers. And we're sitting there year two. In the wintertime, we knew we would only sell 10 to 15 maybe on a Saturday at the farmer's market, which was our honey hole during the summer. And it's 20 degrees. I get a call at 6 o'clock. I've already been prepping for a few hours. And Sarah said, hey, I'm dropping Gert at mom's this morning. I'm going to come help you at the farmer's market, which was like her way of going, I'm going to be there so you don't cry all morning. And we're sitting there on the food truck. This is year two. She's gotten a job offer at a local company. She's finishing her master's. She did an internship. They offered her a job. And so we just have to get her through one more semester of school and we can quit this craziness and I can go back to school and figure out what I want to do in life. And we're cleaning up the food truck and all of a sudden we see these people from church and they come up. It's husband, wife, 4 kids. And they have a guy with them, and I'm sitting there. We're like, hey, and they're like, hey, Worleys, we haven't sold jack that day. I'm like, hey, I want some biscuits. Yeah. And so we feed all them. And this is our friend Clyde. He's from Portland, Oregon. I'm like, hey, Clyde, Portland, Oregon. Oh my God, that's like the home of food trucks.
Yeah.
He's like, yeah, I hate food trucks. I'm like, oh, well, we're going to go on great, Clyde. And so give them food. Clyde's like, okay, I'll take something. So I feed Clyde. They're like, hey, it's 20 degrees out here. We're going to go to our car and eat this. Absolutely. So they go off. We finish cleaning. And all of a sudden I look around. I see Clyde out in the food truck. I'm like, hey, Clyde, you need anything? And he said, no, I need to, can I come up on the food truck? And I was like, yeah, man, come on. And so I opened the door and food truck's about as big as your kitchen table. So I'm like, here's the fryer. Over here's where and he grabs Sarah's shoulder and he grabs my shoulder and he said, I don't care about any of that. He said, God told me I had to come back here because y'all are talking about quitting right now and you can't quit. And I looked at Sarah and she just starts weeping and I start bawling and I'm like, okay, Clyde, we won't quit. And he was like, oh, no. You don't understand. You cannot quit. You're in the valley and you can't see the forest for the trees.
Wow.
But God has more in store for you than you could ever imagine. You cannot quit this journey right now. Do you understand me? And we're like, okay, Clyde, we won't quit. And 10 minutes goes by. He gets off the food truck. I look at Sarah and I'm like, what was that? And she said, you've never been prophesied over. And I'm like, what? Wow.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, I grew up in East Tennessee. I can't even spell prophesize. And I'm like, okay, well, I can't wait for you to finish college. And she said, oh no, we're not quitting. I'm like, oh man, Clyde got me. And so we're sitting there, and this is like just wrecked my world. And crazy enough, 2 weeks later, we get a phone call from the Today Show. Hey guys, we know that we want to do this segment. One of the people that we want is a food truck from Nashville. Y'all's name kept popping up. Crazy thing is, you have to be available next week to film. It's going to be 3 days of filming. We'll pay you for your time. And we're going to send in this guy named Martin Lindstrom, who typically works with Fortune 50 companies, Coke, Pepsi, to work on marketing and things for them. He's $40,000 a day. We'll pay for him for 2 days for you. And you just have to be willing to rebrand. And so we're like, okay.
Yeah.
And so we record with the Today Show and Martin Lindstrom. And one of the things he says is, because we're chasing, we're doing 14 events a week trying to chase money. And he said, what are you doing? You make money at the farmer's market consistently every week. You've billed yourself as this food truck that serves biscuits anytime, but you go to the breweries and you don't make any money. What do you do? And what do you want to be when you grow up? And we're like, we don't know. And he said, think about that. And so day 2, we're like, we want to be a brunch restaurant. And he said, well, you better start acting like one.
Wow.
And so we start going, okay. And we start following some of his moves. And he said, I'd always held Sunday I was too tired to go to church. And so I just held it as a day of rest. Somebody had always wanted me to come to their place and set up every Sunday, kind of like the farmer's market. So we started doing that. We started working 2 days a week and making more money than we did any of the years before, but it also allowed us to hone and think about who we wanted to be.
Yeah.
And people, when that aired, people started approaching us saying, hey, you need money. I've got money. Let's open a restaurant together. Sarah and I would really think about it, and something would always check our spirit about it. And it was finally, she voiced, Karl, we can get money anywhere. We've never run a restaurant. We don't know what we're doing. And so a few months in, we meet these guys that have restaurants. They've helped start over 1,000 restaurants. We partner with them. That fall we open, I guess that fall we start to the construction, and then spring of 15, we open up Biscuit Love in the Gulch. And we open up day 1. I look at Sarah and I'm like, I have no idea what I'm doing. She said, I don't either, but we're going to be really nice to people and we're going to just do what we do. And that's how the whole thing started. And then it's kind of been, Clyde, a few months after that, Clyde visited. And he said, what do you think? And I'm like, Clyde, this is insane. And he said, yeah, God's not done yet. This ain't it. And I'm like, okay, Clyde, okay, sure. And so we get on Bon Appétit. It feels weird still talking about this. We get on Bon Appétit's 50 best new restaurants in the U.S. our first year. One of our sandwiches is Sandwich of the Year with them. And it's been this crazy fun ride ever since.
Man, there's so much packed into that journey. I think one of the things that I take out of hearing all of that, Karl, is there were so many people who spoke into that journey and spoke into you and Sarah's lives along the way. Whether it was Clyde who said hey, keep going, keep pressing, or people who just showed up at the right time, were willing to have a conversation with you. And so talk about how that experience that you guys have had, that you're now modeling that in how you guys run Biscuit Love and how you support your employees and the people that work for you guys.
Yeah, I think, we started the restaurant. We knew we had great mentors in our partners, but we always believe in being mentored and mentoring others. And so we started looking for mentors. We found this company out of Ann Arbor, Michigan called Zingerman's.
I grew up going to Zingerman's, baby. I love that.
Man.
So good.
Man. Now watch, the owner of Zingerman's is going to call me Every time I think about Ari, he calls me and he's like, "Hey, Karl, man, I was just thinking about you." And so we go to them. They teach us how to write vision, mission, values. We really resonate with what they're teaching. We believe that life is, the best moments happen in the gray area. Black or white exists, but the gray area is where the magic happens, especially in the food business.
Yes.
And so we start out and we're going and we're doing what we know. In our 2025 vision, which is on our website, we share it publicly. It says, crazy things like we're going to have therapists on staff. We're going to have YMCA memberships for people. For myself, I put in there that we're going to have a massage therapist on staff.
Let's go.
I wish that would happen. Yeah, seriously. Come on. Come on, God. And so we're doing this, and we're living this, really breathing this vision. And at this point, we've only got one location, and Sarah and I are meeting with the employees every day, and we're in the restaurant, we're living life. And we have these two guys that work for us, and I call them the Edric brothers. They were cousins. There was Cedric and Frederick. Cedric was 5'5", 120 pounds soaking wet. Frederick was 6'7", dreadlocks to his butt, and he looked like a Titans linebacker. And they would start just screaming at each other in the kitchen, and Sarah would walk by. "Guys, I can hear you outside. Shut up." "Oh, Miss Sarah, we ain't arguing. We just debating real hard." And so we get to Frederick one day, and Sarah goes, "All right, Frederick, it's your turn. Let's have some breakfast together." And so, "Okay, Miss Sarah, what do you mean?" "Well, let's what do you want for breakfast?" "You mean I can take a break?" "Well, yeah, Frederick, come sit down." "Can I have," at this point we had steak and eggs on the menu. "Can I have the steak and eggs?" "Yeah, Frederick." "Can I have 2 steaks?" "Frederick, you can have anything you want, man." "Okay." So he puts in his order. He sits down. Sarah and I sit down next to him. He kind of looks over weird at us. We've worked with him for 4 months at that time. And he looks over and he looks back, and Sarah goes, "What's wrong, Frederick? You need something?" He goes, "No, y'all going to eat with me?" She goes, "Well, yeah, Frederick, we told you. We want to get to know you. Tell us your story." And he said, "Well, before this, I was a dishwasher at the pub. And before that, I was a dishwasher here." She said, "Hold on, Frederick. I don't care about any of that. I want to know about your mom and them. Where'd you grow up? What'd you do?" And he looks back and he says, "Miss Sarah, can I be really honest with you?" And she said, "Yeah, Frederick, I hope you're always honest." And he said, "I never worked anywhere where anyone knew my name, let alone cared about my story."
Wow.
And so we have that breakfast, and we get up, and Sarah walks outside, and I walk out, and she's bawling, crying. And I said, "What's going on?" And she said, "I've never worked somewhere where no one didn't know my name."
Yeah.
And she said, "We are in our field. This is where God wants us. We're in the mission field right now."
Yeah.
And we have no idea the level of our security and what we grew up with. And I think that day is the pivot point that changed who we were as business owners and what we want to do.
Yeah.
We quickly realized that people don't need YMCA. It's hard to use a YMCA membership when it costs $100 a month to get a bus pass on a bus that's not really that reliable. And these people have never had anybody, a lot of people in the food industry, it's been this thing for years. You can get out of prison and go get a job washing dishes. I mean, it's what the church should be in a lot of ways. And there's a lot of good churches out there, and there's a lot of good churches that do it, but man, I can kill somebody, go to prison for 20 years, get out on parole, and I could be washing dishes this evening.
Yeah.
And so it's a place where people can hide. It's typically a place, it's a pirate ship. And we really want to buck that model and blow that model up and make it a place of restoration and healing and a place where it's a family.
Wow.
Karl, I think what's amazing about that is obviously when people start a work, you know, it's like you care about, you know, having a good food experience and making those memories as you know, with people's families and friends and all that stuff, right? Like that's a big deal. Mm-hmm. And there's a technical ability that you guys have to do that, right? Like you are the freaking Biscuit King. Are you kidding me? Right. Like you have technical abilities, right? In that sense. But then this second side of it, I think especially in the food industry, where so many things can look and feel the same, to be like, yeah, not only do we want our food experience to be awesome, we also want this experience for our employees and our staff to be seen, to be known, to be, you know, redemptive, right? And I think that is this cross section of so many of our listeners, you know, whether they're, you know, working in a business or a business owner or working in a nonprofit or a church or a stay-at-home parent or whatever it might be, thinking through not just how do I be a good parent, not just how do I do good in my job or, you know, this, that, and the other, but like how am I treating people along the way? And how do I do that in a way that's warm and welcoming, but also I think sometimes, and like you said, there are a lot of great churches, there are a lot of wonderful people who love and follow Jesus, but then there are those people that have the iron fist and hit you with the, you know, with the uppercut or the hook, and you're just like,
the Sadducees and the Pharisees are still here.
So how have you navigated that tension of just like, hey, we want people to know where this comes from and why we do this, but also create an environment where people can just come and be and receive, and obviously still, you know, you got to perform and do your job too. You got to show up on time and those kind of things. What's that been like in these last few years?
It's been challenging, rewarding. We have 2 therapists on staff. We've got a lot of things that we've done. Sarah and I, for a long time, didn't speak of any of this stuff because we were like, I want people to come and want to eat here because it feels different, not because we're doing this stuff. And eventually it got to a place where it was like, I think God hit us with, if you don't tell people this, there are people that I've planted seeds in their heart who don't have the blessing of having you and Sarah, those hearts that go, I dream stuff up, Sarah makes it happen. Sarah dreams stuff up, I put wind in it. And so if you don't show people, nobody's going to know. There's people out there with seeds that you're not going to be able to, you're not watering. And so we've just recently started trying to figure out, how do we tell the story in a way that doesn't open us up, because we get a lot of stuff wrong, man. We screw up a lot. We're human, and I wish we got it all right, but it's figuring out these ways of come alongside people and, okay, this is happening, but this, you know, we started at day one, we wanted to give every full-time employee health insurance, and we celebrated in that. And Sarah and I are like, man, we're doing such, you know, some people have never had insurance. We have a guy come to us one day and he's like super sick. We're like, Mike, dude, why have you not gone to a doctor? I know you got insurance. And he was like, well, I called them and they said I need to go to the PCP. And I was so embarrassed. I don't know what a PCP is, Mr. Karl. And I'm like, Mike, wow, we got it. There's where we're getting it wrong. And so it's these like, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, moments of definition, but it's also recently it's been trying to figure out what's going to make the most impact in employees' lives. And especially as our world, in my view, gets turned upside down with who we have and who we value, showing God's love to the least of these, and trying to figure that out in a healthy way, with healthy tension is hard. You know, you can have a meal at Biscuit Love regardless of if you can pay for it or not. You're entitled to a dignified meal. And so it's not here's some leftovers from yesterday, get out of here. I'll want the employees to sit someone down, let them order whatever they want, give them some food to go, and let them eat and go. And 9 times out of 10, 99 times out of 100, that works great. But we had a guy last week, we had to protect our employees, and we have a full-time armed guard for the next 2 weeks because we had a homeless guy break a window and do some things at our restaurant. And it was like, those are the challenging moments of, God, I know that we're doing the right thing, but man, we need something here because the employees are going, my employers are nuts for making me do this.
Wow.
I think what I love in all of that is doing it differently, and the courage to do it is hard. And I think ultimately you pay for what you value in some way, whether with your time, whether with the headaches, whether with the money.
Yep.
There's so many times where organizations can have all these, this beautiful thing on the wall that says their values. And then you stick around there in the atmosphere for like a day or two, and you're like, yeah, I don't see it, man. Like, this just feels like everything else. Yeah. And I think those inflection points and those moments, in our business, when we work with clients, or in our nonprofit, when we're helping people dream through maybe that next thing for them to launch or whatever. And it's like, ultimately you will pay for, either with your time, in relationships, in finances and investment or whatever, and headache and heartache, with what you value. And I think that becomes that measuring stick. And I know that you guys, it's not just been like, oh man, this is easy, everyone should just do this tomorrow. It's like, it's messy. Windows get broken, and people are, even your team is like, are we sure this is what we value?
Right.
Are we sure this is what we want? But then you have those moments and those beautiful pockets and stories, like you shared, of a team member who is like, no one's ever asked me my name, let alone my story, man.
Yeah.
And I think I don't care your title, your position, whatever it is, like, man, that's something that we can this week just really look somebody in the eyes and be like, hey, tell me what's your story.
Yeah.
I was reminded of this. My van door broke. It's the dumbest thing ever. Bought this van a month ago, and the automatic door, the cable snapped, and the door's like hanging off. Okay. It's like, it won't close. Like, this is a serious problem. And all these car dealerships, nobody could help me. And there's a neighbor, and this neighbor I don't know well, and kind of intimidated by this person. And I went over and I was like, he's working on like putting like an actual part into a BMW, like restoring a vehicle, like doing actual. And I just walk over there and I'm like, hey, my name's Brandon, and my van door fell off, and you seem to always be working on something. Could you come help me? And even in that, one, as a dude, just humbling yourself and being like, I need help with something mechanical is not always easy. But I got to know this guy, and most people would have spent, he's got the typical ZZ Top beard, tats everywhere, smoking a couple Marlboros right, like literally 2 inches from my face. Like, I'm just like, I'm fine. Like, that's cool. If smoking's fine. Like, if you want to do that,
let's do this.
But like,
you fix my door where I can put my kids in, you can do whatever.
But I'm like, you're 2 inches from my face. But most people within 15 to 20 minutes would have just given up. And this guy gave me 2 hours of his Saturday afternoon.
Yeah.
And said, we're going to get this door not just on, we're going to get it functional. And we're just cranking away at this thing. And it's those moments are such a beautiful reminder of what just happens as if you ask someone to help, or maybe you tell someone you need some help, and just the windows of opportunities to get to know their story, to break down some of those assumptions and those walls, and how that might, impact you or impact somebody else. I love that about your guys' story.
Yeah.
God has all the chess pieces on the board. If you can move your ego off the board.
Yeah.
ZZ Top is there, and time, giving 2 hours of your time is the most. I would rather have 2 hours of someone's time than any amount of money.
Absolutely.
A lot of times.
Yeah, there's so much in that too of just of viewing people in the image of God and how they were made, and then providing dignity for them. And like when you can do those things, which should actually be really simple things for us to do as people, sometimes it's very difficult for us to do. We do get our ego on the board, our pride gets in the way. And so, Karl, it's just so encouraging to see how you guys have done that with this business model, and you guys are changing the game. You're doing this restaurant thing completely differently. And we here at this podcast love that. So Karl, as we head towards the conclusion of our conversation today, what is a book? What is a podcast? What is a TV show? Something that you have just been inspired by recently, something that you've been watching, listening to, that's just really been teaching you a lot?
I would say Scott Erickson's book, Say Yes.
Yep.
I've been reading that to a lot of employees, and that's actually how Carrie and I met. I've got a neighbor who works for a big time Christian author who brings me books all the time. He's like, man, I think you're going to get a lot out of this. And I'm like, Jake, you got this for free from your boss, didn't you? Yeah, but I think you'll get a lot out of it. And so Scott's book is one of the ones I'm like, you got this for free, didn't you, Jake? He's like, trust me, Karl. And so 2 days later, I got COVID, and this was in March of this year. I read it in one sitting. I went and saw him in Chicago. That's where I saw Carrie, met Carrie. That's been inspiring me. Brene Brown always inspires me when I stop and listen to her podcast. I used to listen to a lot more podcasts. Last year I walked the Camino de Santiago. For some reason, my wife, Sarah, bumped her head and let me go to Spain for 6 weeks. And I packed my ear pods. I had all of these podcasts on, and it's the one thing I'd never stopped and listened to God. And so now I don't put headphones in. This is the first time I've had my headphones in 2 months. So I think Scott's book, I'm sitting here looking at my current books, What's Here Now by Jeannie, and then Richard Rohr. I've been reading a lot of Richard Rohr here recently.
Man, that Say Yes book by Scott Erickson, if you've not checked that out, very, very good. He's also an incredible social media follow if you're on social. Just really encouraging and really speaks a lot of life into, I think, the circumstances we find ourselves in every day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Before we wrap up here, Karl, and how people can get connected with you and what you guys are doing, just talk, because I know we've talked about it, but like, just what are you wrestling through with this whole time and space of not just leading in a business, but embracing following Jesus in this culture, in this time, in this era, in this time where we see, church leaders or institutions, not living up to what we would hope that they would. What's that been like for you? What's that journey been like? What's maybe some things that I know obviously some of the things you're reading and stuff like that, but what are some of those things that you've been like practices, rhythms, applications for your own life? Because I think it's easy for me to be like, that person stinks, that person's wrong, I knew that was coming, right? But like, what's that been like? What are those things you've been able to grab onto in a solidity, rhythms, practices, those kinds of things, man?
I think one of the things that I learned on the Camino was nobody cares what you do. And it's one of the things that one of the first questions everyone asks here. And so trying to really stop and go, why are you here? And just ask people like, why are you here? And let them kind of go as far or not as deep into that. But also, I think God put a superpower in all of us, and mine seems to be able to see people. And so trying to hone and lead into that, keep that clear. And that's been my thing that I've been working on recently in the business. It's really, you and I talked about this a little bit, Brandon. It's challenging for me right now because I know to not get too deep into it, for the first few years, Sarah and I never realized that you're really supposed to make money in this business. We're just giving away everything. And then we figure out these nice people that give you money kind of want to return. And so we're still not motivated by that in our personal life. I think if I die, my personal value is if I die with $1 in my bank, I hope God looks at me and goes, man, you didn't do enough. And so I'm trying to figure out how, in a world where my home has increased in value in Nashville over 100% in the last 2 years, do I provide affordable housing and the chance of home ownership to, I've got dishwashers who will make over $50,000 this year and they won't have the joy of home ownership, or they can't vision that.
Yeah.
And how do we do that? But also we're really missing the mark on, we're getting these kids too late. Sarah went and spent a day in court a couple weeks ago for a kid that works for us, and we've been in his life since he was 16. And we're getting them too late, and I don't know where we're missing it, but I'm trying to figure out, we, as business owners, we want to have boards for everything. Every time somebody asks me to sit on a board, I think, well, I'm honored. And then I sit on it, and 2 weeks later, I'm like, I need to roll off of this because I don't like it. How do I revision a board and almost have advisors that we meet with and intercessors, people that pray for us, pray for the business, that aren't afraid to tell us that we're wrong. And we got it wrong, but also are people like lawyers and doctors who every now and then will come and eat and talk to the employees and go, hey, let me help you with that.
Wow. I love it.
And how do I make that mutually beneficial for them? How do I go, man, I can't pay you your lawyer's rate, but I can give you free biscuits.
Yeah. That's so good, man.
So good.
So Karl, how do people find one of these restaurants? How do they find you guys on the interwebs, social media, those kind of things, man?
Oh man. Biscuit Love Brunch. If you go to biscuitlove.com, everything's there, including our vision. Read it. Tell me where we went wrong. We're getting ready to write our 2035 vision. So that's there. It links to all the socials. I'm Karl, Karl Worley. You can find me on all the socials that I never use. I look at them, but I've been on a spiritual cleanse of trying to figure out whether I'm posting for ego or posting because it's useful. So
it's good, man. Well, we want to say thank you, Karl, for coming on the show. We want to say thank you to all of our listeners for tuning in to this episode of the 4 Everyday Leaders podcast by Wayfinders. We hope it helps you lead in the everyday spaces and moments of your life.
Yeah, and we would love for you to continue to join us on the journey of the 4 Everyday Leaders podcast. You can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Anchor, and YouTube. Karl, thanks for taking time. Thanks for hopping on the call. This was such an encouraging conversation. Appreciate you, man.
Thanks, Karl.
Hey, thank you guys. Y'all have a good day.